a turnout. This is great. Now, before we officially begin, I didn't anticipate having you all wait in line. So if you didn't sign in, we're going to just pass around the sign-in sheet. If you didn't sign in. If you did, then we've got it. The only reason for the sign-in was to make sure we have an up-to-date email for you, because trying to keep track of this many people, we sometimes don't have email addresses for everybody. And Tony is going to pass around the sign-in sheet. And if you want to take one of these handouts that we have, again, I didn't know how many you would have. And this is just for people who didn't sign in, and then, of course, take a sign. Handout. Great. Okay, now. Okay. So, welcome everyone to our next ARPA presentation called Porter County ARPA, Where Do We Go From Here? Some of you are probably saying, why isn't the title, when am I going to get my money? But I hope you'll all know why we need to go through a process. By way of introduction, my name is Vicki Urbanik, Porter County Auditor, and I do have, I'm going to have two of our ARPA team members here, and when they both come in, I'd like to introduce them to you, because we are going to be developing quite a relationship with all of you in the coming weeks, months, and possibly even years. Okay, now, before I really officially begin, I want to put a plug in for a national event that's happening next week, Operation Greenlight. This is a national initiative that's being spearheaded by NACO and the National Veterans Service Organization. It's to call attention to veterans and all of the different services that are available to veterans. And I am proud to say Porter County government is a participant in Operation Greenlight. And what that means is that next week we're going to have our buildings lit up in green lights. And we also have a flyer that has been developed that shows the different programs and services that county government has for veterans. And so if any of you want to participate by putting up a green light at your home or business, please do so. Now, I know that's not why we're here, but it's a good project, and we are sort of one of the lead offices that's involved with it. So I mentioned to you that I have my two ARPA team members here, and I'd like them to stand up and sort of be recognized. One is Chief Deputy Tony Downing, who's already standing up, and the other one is Budget and Finance Director Tiffany Johnson. The reason why they are part of our ARPA team is that the three of us are the ones who primarily prepare our county's financial statements every year, and that includes federal grant reporting. And that means that our financial statements and federal grant reporting then are audited every year. There are some counties that don't go through the federal audit process. Now, if I ask to see a show of hands, which I'm not going to, how many of you have gone through a federal audit? I would anticipate there would be very few hands going up. We have. In fact, this is our 8th year of going through a federal compliance audit. It's mandatory, it's required, and it is a process, believe me. And the ARPA grant is a federal award. It's not just free money that came down to us. We have to go through a variety of processes. We are expected to maintain certain documentation and go through certain procedures. When you try to put into perspective what this federal grant means to us in Porter County, let's think about that in a normal year, meaning a non-COVID year. Our largest federal grant that we reported most recently totaled only $883,000. Now, that's a lot of money, yes. But when the CARES Act hit, we got a federal grant of $5.5 million. Well, ARPA is nothing like that. We're talking about $33 million. This is going to be by far our largest single federal grant that we are going to be reporting. In addition, the reporting requirements are quite a bit different. We have to provide quarterly reports to the U.S. Treasury. And in addition, I take delight in what I'm about to say. Most federal grants that we deal with in the auditor's office involve maybe one, maybe two or three other departments, right? And they're all county departments. They're all people that we already know. We already pay their payroll. We already pay their claims. Well, thanks to the process that we went through this year in county government, not only are we dealing with a number of county departments in terms of reporting this federal grant, but we have inherited 12 townships to work with, and we also are going to be working with 20 nonprofit organizations who have 22 different projects, and each project has to be individually reported. So it is going to be a huge, monumental task in the auditor's office. And I say that with a smile on my face, because my involvement with ARPA, I am not going to speak for my two colleagues there, but my involvement in ARPA has been nothing but a sheer delight. It has been a labor of love. I know that we have some really wonderful projects that are underway or proposed here in Porter County. Whether it's being proposed by a nonprofit or a township or a county office, we have a wide variety of projects that are really going to address some needs we have in Porter County, and it is going to make some really major improvements in the services that we provide to the people. I try to keep my personal opinions out of everything I do, but on this particular issue, I am really excited about our ARPA plan. Okay, so let's get into this. Now, so where do we go from here? What I think it's important to do, first, let's review very quickly how we got here. Okay, so on the next slide, I know it's hard to see, but this is a summary of the approval process. All of you are going to be partners with us in this audit process. So let's all get on the same page. There are two steps that are required for every ARPA project. The project must be included in a plan that's approved by the commissioners, and there must be an appropriation or appropriations approved by the county council. I think some of you are very well familiar with this process, and you need both to have a project considered final. So on February 22nd, our commissioners and our council met on that same day. The commissioners approved a plan that included the first 4 initial projects. And then later that night, the county council approved the appropriations. So from the standpoint of project approval, those were approved pretty much on February 22nd. Then we all know what happened, what came next. The county commissioners set up a steering committee and 4 subcommittees. And the role of those subcommittees was to look at the proposals that were submitted through this very public, open submission process. That was their role. And so we got through the whole steering committee process and the subcommittee process, and on August 2nd, the commissioners included the recommendations from the steering committee in a plan. So part 1 was approved, and that included many of you. I know we have some townships here. You were already approved back in February, at least the project. Then we had to wait for the appropriations. On September 20th, the county council did approve appropriations for part of the August 2nd plan, specifically those in infrastructure and COVID-19. And I know we have some people that were included in that part of the plan, but it didn't include everything. I do want to point out that in the August 2nd plan, there was something else added to it that the subcommittees didn't address, and that was the declaration that our county wanted to declare that we were taking the maximum allowance under a specific category called revenue replacement. And so the commissioners had to put that in their plan. But they didn't identify any projects associated with that. You guys may not have ever heard of that because that wasn't part of the subcommittee process. So then, we already went to September 20th, right? So then, October 18th, the county council approved appropriations for the remaining projects that were in that August 2nd plan, and then they approved appropriations for 7 additional projects in that revenue replacement category, which were not mentioned in that August 2nd plan. So they had to be specified. And now we're wrapping it up on November 1st, which was just 2 days ago. The commissioners approved those 7 additional county projects in a county plan. And that was first reading only, and second reading still needs to happen. So that is the long and the short of it. Just about all of you here have gone through that whole process. And now we're going to the next phase, which I like to call the audit, reporting, and compliance phase. And from my standpoint, this is where the real work begins. It wasn't all of who's going to get the money. It's what we have to do now. The whole point of what we're doing now is that we need to build an audit file for each project. We have to have as complete and thorough of an audit file as possible, because let's say that one of your projects get expended this year, before the end of the year, it will be audited next year. And the federal examiners will come and they will ask us for documentation. And they will need to see verification that the auditor's office went through certain procedures and that we have certain documentation. Like I said before, we have a good idea of what we think they're going to be asking for. We realized after ARPA was signed into law and after all those workshops that we went through, that if we didn't start building the framework, getting the audit file started, if we didn't start this process with the potential of so many other participants in this, it was going to get completely away from us. And so that's what we're working on now. We're building the audit file for each of you. Each of you is a project in our office. Each of you have your own account in our office. And we are, like I said, going to develop a relationship with all of you in a way that we haven't before. We've worked with Porter Stark before, OE, because of the relationship pact, but we have never worked with the rest of you. And so it's kind of an exciting time. So what is the next step? The first step is going to be written agreements. There needs to be a written agreement prepared between us and you. This is to spell out the terms and the conditions of your award. So I want to go through a written agreement. First off, I will say that we will prepare the written agreement and we will send it to you for your review. And if something needs to be changed, then we can work on that. However, there's going to be a lot of standard language that's going to apply to everybody. We're not changing that, and you'll see what I'm talking about. But there are parts that are going to be tailor-made just for you. And if you want to see a written agreement, some of you already have written agreements. If you want to see a written agreement, they are posted on the auditor's website. We post them after they are officially approved. We do view those as public documents, and so maybe you'll see why in just a second. So here is, I know you can't read it really, but let's just kind of go through it. This is the written agreement that we have with Center Township. They were approved back in February as part of the Township Assistance Program. The very first paragraph gives your name and your address. Please double check that when you get this agreement. I know that sounds basic, but we want to make sure that we have your most up-to-date address on file. We might be using a satellite office. Again, we don't really know all of you. You know, we need your legal corporate office. Then it follows where there's a number of whereases. That's standard boilerplate language that we are going to use on every agreement. These agreements were modeled after several that have already been in place, largely from very, very large cities across the country. And so I tried to find, really some good quality written agreements that would be applicable to us. So now the next parts of the agreement is where we really get into the meat of things. Point number one is going to mention what everyone probably already knows. You must obligate your funds by July 1st, 2024. An obligation means that there is some sort of a legally binding agreement that says that you're going to pay your vendor or your supplier or whatever your project is, okay? As long as we have it obligated, you should be fine. If you don't spend all of your allocation, or if you choose not to spend any of it, then as of July 1st, if it's not obligated, then it'll revert back to the county. And the reason why we're moving that deadline up to July 1st, the federal deadline is December 31st of that year, is because, believe it or not, if this money reverts back to the county still has to go through that two-step process. And believe it or not, it might take some time for two boards to reach a consensus to come up with an agreement on how to spend the money. So that's why we're moving it up to July 1st. It is possible. Some of you may not need all of your allocation. The point number two says the maximum amounts that you are allocated. Everything that has been stated in terms of dollar amounts in the commissioner ordinances, i.e. the plans, have been up to amounts. And that has been in the ordinance. It's not until the council appropriates the dollar amount that's the legal obligation to pay that amount, or the legal obligation to spend that amount. If your project doesn't come up to that amount, then we can't spend the money. It's just a legal commitment to spend up to that amount. And now on point three, it's going to designate whether you are a subrecipient or a beneficiary. Now, this is a point that has really caused a lot of consternation in our office. We have spent a considerable amount of time trying to get at the difference between subrecipient and beneficiary as it applies to your projects. On the next slide, some of you may remember this from the prior ARPA presentations. The definition of a subrecipient for federal grant purposes is that you are carrying out a program or service on behalf of the recipient, in other words, on behalf of the county. Subrecipients are required to go through a risk assessment, monitoring. You are required to follow certain provisions of the Code of Federal Regulations, and the one that probably is the most applicable is the procurement process, which basically says that you must put your project out for competitive pricing. You need to make sure that you're getting the open market pricing for your projects. And you may be subject to a federal audit pursuant to the Single Audit Act. Now, a beneficiary, on the other hand, is considered an end user of the award. You're not subject to all of the same provisions as a subrecipient. But for purposes of the SLFRF program, beneficiaries that are nonprofits needed to demonstrate economic harm or financial loss or a financial impact. So the challenge that we had was that many nonprofits submitted proposals under the nonprofit financial impact committee category. And many of you nonprofits demonstrated financial harm because of COVID-19. That's great, that's wonderful, but you were also proposing projects that are enumerated uses. We have childcare, we have workforce development, we have early childhood development, we have food services, housing, all of those are enumerated uses. So if you look at the next slide, this is a paragraph in the U.S. Treasury's compliance reporting guidance. And I won't read the whole thing, but it just basically says, for example, a county may provide an award to a nonprofit to provide homes or home services to people experiencing homelessness. In this case, the sub-award is based on the services that the recipient intends to provide, and in that case, that nonprofit would be considered a sub-recipient. So what do we do if that particular nonprofit also claimed revenue loss or financial impact? It's gray. It's not necessarily a black and white issue, and it could mean a lot to all of you if you are concerned about possibly being subjected to the Single Audit Act or your procurement provisions. And so it is a big, important question. And when we report your expenditure on that reports that we must submit to Treasury, we must designate what you are, whether you are a subrecipient, a beneficiary, or a contractor. We won't talk about the contractors here. So, the good news is that I know that we aren't alone in dealing with this issue. I went to a national conference a few months ago, and I spoke with people from throughout the country, and guess what? They had the same question. And it's not very clear. But just last week, we had a county auditor conference, and we received some additional guidance from the State Board of Accounts. And that State Board of Accounts is our state auditing entity. And so based on the guidance that they provided, we are developing a new set of procedures where we are going to try to document why we are classifying you in this manner. And we hope that our procedures will be used as justification when it comes up to an audit, because we don't want the auditors to say, hey, you classified this group as a beneficiary, but it really should have been a subrecipient. I'm feeling a lot more comfortable with where we're going in this process, and I do believe we're going to end up with more beneficiaries than subrecipients. And I just see some smiles in the audience. I think it's good now, but do keep in mind that even if you are a beneficiary, we have to clear a hurdle. And this is on the next, there we go. This is language that's taken straight from our reports that we have to submit on a quarterly basis. And I do want to say something. I know that there are some other entities, other counties that have contracted out for this work. We do all of this in-house. Okay. So, Treasury says, provide a description of the structure and objectives of the grant, including the negative economic impact experience. This also applies to the public health category. So we have to answer that. We have to provide a narrative. And then the second question is provide a description of our approach to ensuring that your award is reasonable and proportional to that economic harm experienced. So we're going to be working on this verbiage for all of you who are claiming the negative economic impact. This is one area where we may reach out to you and say, what do you think we should say about this? Now, let's go back. The first question, I'm going to pick on somebody. I'm going to pick on Neo. What I would say in that is that you are going to utilize your award for the development of a child care and workforce development program. We'll make sure we have the right verbiage. In response to the loss that you experienced with students that stayed home and you lost revenue because of the COVID shutdown, and I believe there was state funding losses as well. The second part would probably address that this is reasonable and proportional because it's going to give you the ability to expand your services and expand your programs, because individuals who can't come to your facility because they lack child care now will be able to, and it will directly respond to the financial impact that you had. In other words, so that if there's another financial downturn, you then will be able to respond better and grow better, more or less. And I'll tell you that about a third of what I just said, it's cut off because we can't go past their word limit. So this is an area that we will probably ask all of you for some help in exactly how should we say this? But we want to take the lead in trying to come up with this language. So we are going back and we're reviewing all of your applications. We're reviewing what you presented to the subcommittees. We have a pretty good idea, but keep in mind, there are many of you. There are a total of about 34 projects that we are keeping track of. Okay, so let's go back to the written agreement. So we're going to say in the written agreement what you are, recipient, subrecipient, or beneficiary. Now, the next part is we're going to identify specifically what you're going to use the award for. And again, this is Center Township, and they have a long list of things that they're using their award for. So we're delineating everything that they're using their award for. And I do know that there are some nonprofits who are getting a grant through Center Township through us. And we're working with Center Township in terms of how exactly to characterize that, but that's going to be an interesting process. So the next, number 5, we talk about supporting documentation. This is going to be left somewhat vague because the type of supporting documentation that we're going to need is really going to depend on your individual project. For example, if you're hiring somebody, we're going to need payroll documentation that you actually use the money for that person. And I'm staring at one person who intends to use it that way. If you are going to buy supplies, and that's all you're doing, you're buying supplies, well, we're going to need to see those invoices or receipts marked as paid, and we're going to have to see that delineation. If it's, let's say, supplies for a housing project, we don't want to see a claim for office supplies or, something like, I don't know, toys for kids. We want to see construction materials. And if that's not what we see, then we will come back and we will be asking you. So exactly what the supporting documentation is going to be sort of case specific. But just this is generally what we're looking for. If once you enter into a contractor with a contractor, we need the contract. We'll need any other agreements between the two of you. We'll need invoices. We'll need, and if you're getting it reimbursable, then we'll need the receipts marked as paid. In other words, just plan to give us everything you got, and we'll develop the audit file. I will say that the audit file is going to be an internal file. We will be posting some things online, but for the most part, what you're giving to us is going to be basically building the audit file for the auditors, because it's going to be easier to develop this now rather than wait till next year and we try to hunt you down for this information. It's not fun to do that, believe me. Even though we've gone through 8 federal audits or just audits in general, there's always something that they ask that we did not anticipate. And sometimes we do have to go back to the department because we don't normally deal with nonprofits and townships in our normal financial statements, but we sometimes do deal with the public library system, and we go back to them and we ask them for more reports. That's a lot of work on them as well, and it would be a lot of work on you to try to recreate all of that, a year from now, or 6 months from now, or 2 years from now. Your people might change. You might not have it. You may have misplaced it, whatever. So let's get it all up front now. Believe me, it'll be so much easier before. I really hope no one gets this attitude or thinks that we're being overly obtrusive or overly intrusive, or that we're trying to be a roadblock. That is not our intent. Our intent is to build that audit file on your behalf, because basically, if there's a bad audit finding, it's going to look bad on your organization as well. And under the very, very worst case scenario, there could be a recoupment process, but we know that that will not happen. So, but we want a good, clean audit, and you want a good, clean audit as well. You want to know that this program was handled just beautifully by Porter County, and that's what we're putting the steps in place for right now. So now on the next slide, we go to number 6, the release of your sub-award. How are you going to get your money? We're finally getting to the question, right? How are you going to get your money? There are several different ways that we'll release your allocation. And again, it's going to depend on your project. One way is that you pay for the costs up front, and then you submit a claim to us for reimbursement. And so that's a pretty clear-cut way of getting your money. Another way is if you say you want the county to just pay your provider or your vendor directly. And so you would send the invoice to us, and we'll just pay your person from your account. This is the type of relationship we're going to have to develop, the type of communication, what works best for you, what works best for us, what makes the most sense. The key is that we need to get that documentation. We do not want to do advances. We really want to avoid that. And what I mean by that is just writing out a check and giving it to you basically, and then we have to hunt you down after the fact for the supporting documentation. However, we do understand that in some instances, advances might be necessary. I don't know if the group is here, but there is one group where they're going to be acquiring property and they need to bring the check at closing. That's sort of an advancement. We'll have some documentation, of course, beforehand, but we're going to have to develop a real clear-cut agreement about after that closing takes place, we need those closing documents. We need to ensure that money was spent for that land acquisition. And again, it is not because we do not trust you. This is not the issue at all. It's that whoever is examining our records do not know you. They don't know us. And even if they do, that's their job, is to audit, and their job is to get this documentation and to ensure that we've gone through all of the steps that's required. So we are going to work with you on how you're going to get your release of your money. It wasn't on the slide, but Center Township, I'll just tell you, they're doing it in a multiple of ways. They have direct invoicing, they have reimbursement, and they do have one advance because of a payroll issue. So they're doing it different ways. And we'll just work with you on what way makes the most sense. And so now, on the next slide is just some more verbiage, paragraph after paragraph, that basically seeks to provide protection for the county as well as you. It talks about whether there's any kind of disputes. What happens if you refuse to give us the documentation? Well, we're not paying anything. I'm just telling you that. It is not meant to be punitive. It is not meant to be as an obstacle. It is meant to ensure that we are doing everything perfectly properly. And at the very end of the agreement, on the next slide, you will see that there's 3 signature lines. This agreement, we would like you to sign it first, if at all possible. Per our county attorney, it should be signed not by your CEO, but by your governing official, like the president of your board. If for some reason you don't have a board, or if your CEO is the same person, we can talk about that. But it's sort of a checks and balance. You know how it works. Your board hires you as the CEO, and they're the ones who sign off on documents like this. So we ask that your board president sign it, and then the president of the county commissioners will sign it, and then it becomes final when the county auditor signs it. And then, after we get the written agreement, hopefully by the time we get the written agreement, we're already building your audit file. We'll already have an idea of where we're going with you. You might already be giving us information at that point. But after that, then you can proceed with whatever it is you're doing. Let's say that you're going to just buy supplies, then, and you're going to get it under a reimbursement basis. Go and buy your supplies. As long as you're following everything, you should be fine. And then you would then seek reimbursement from us. On the next slide, this is a repeat of an old one. Document, document, document. Just remember that if there's any takeaway from today, we just need to document. Give us more than you think is necessary. We will file it. All of you have your own file in the auditor's computer, or you're going to, but some of you are well underway. And everything that we can put in on your project will be put in your audit file, so that when the examiners come there and we say, oh yes, we have the document right here, it'll save you next year, it'll save you time and trouble, and it will save us in the auditor's office. So what kind of documentations? Again, we talked about contracts, invoices, bank statements, ledgers, payroll receipts, whatever information that we think is appropriate in your particular case. But there are other things that we could have as supporting documentation. Photos, for example. We had a project where there's going to be an improvement to the parking lot and the sidewalk that goes to a food pantry. The township trustees sent us photos, and it's wonderful that this project is happening because the sidewalk and the stairs are all messed up, and this is a injury waiting to happen. And think about people who might need township poor relief services or food pantry services. If they are disabled, if they're in a chair, I don't know how anyone can access that kind of broken up pavement. So photos is good. Photos is really good. Letters, memos. We may ask you to put something, to certify something on letterhead stationery, just so that we have you saying that this is appropriate, or this is what I'm verifying took place. Again, I don't want to get into any details because it's really going to depend on your individual project. And there'll be follow-up calls and emails and site visits. Subrecipients are required to undergo ongoing monitoring, but we are going to monitor all beneficiaries as well. We are very happy about your projects, but we want to monitor, and we want to make sure that we want to see what you've done with the money. So expect to see a visit from the auditor's office if we think that that is appropriate. One thing that the agreements give is a lot of flexibility for the auditor's office to develop what we think is appropriate to have a proper audit file. And again, it is just out of protection for both of us. And now on the next slide is an accounts payable voucher. When you are ready to have your project paid for, in part or in full. It could be over a series of expenditures. You'll need to provide us with the supporting documentation, whatever that may be, but you'll also need to fill out an accounts payable voucher. And this is what it looks like. We will fill out the budget part up at the top because that's going to have the fund name and the line item. You don't need to worry about that. That's on our end. But you will need to fill out, who are we paying this to? You know, the vendor. If it's reimbursement, it will be your organization's name, not you individually. It will be your organization's name. And then just fill out invoice date, invoice number, and then the description and the amount. And we do ask that you sign this. Now, the signature does not have to be your board president on this. It can be you as CEO, CFO. We just need the responsible person to sign this. Now, we are going to try to develop a relationship with each of you. So if we magically get this accounts payable voucher and we have no idea who this person is, we will be reaching out to you. So it would be really good if we establish who is that authorized person to sign these vouchers. So you don't want, I'm not saying that this happens, but you don't want maybe an office worker submitting a voucher for payment and you know nothing about it. So we just need to have that as a control. And then we will sign it and you will submit it. We've decided that with these AP vouchers, some of you might have multiple claims. Just go ahead and email it to us. We don't need the original. But with the agreement, we want the original. I failed to say that. We want the original signed agreement. So yes, you'll have to physically get this to us. If need be, one of us can come to you for a site visit and we could pick it up in person if need be. But we want that original signature on those agreements. But with the AP vouchers, you could just email it, or you could send it in. It really doesn't matter to us as long as we have the AP voucher. What this means is that you are directing us to basically credit your account, pay this, and we will credit your account. Some of you might have just one payment. Some of you are going to have a series of payments, and we expect that. In a sense, we are treating all of you as one of our county departments. Welcome to county government. And so our commitment to you is that we do try to get these claims paid once we go through the process and we see that everything looks appropriate. I think that the real time is going to be spent getting to this process. For example, do we have the most recent contract on file? Do we have the most recent invoice? Do we have whatever might be missing from your file? I think that once you submit a payment to be paid, you're going to see it paid pretty quickly. Generally, the rule of thumb in the auditor's office is that if you get it to us by noon on Thursday, it will be in the following week's check run. That doesn't always happen that way, but we do try to have a quick turnaround time. Now, some of you might be thinking, boy, this sounds like a lot of work. Again, I think most of the work is going to come at the very beginning, getting that written agreement and getting all of your documentation in order. Rule of thumb, just send us everything that you've got. And it is probably, better to be safe than sorry. But let me give you an example of that one township. The township agreement was approved, I believe, in October by the commissioners. I went to conference just last week, and Tony told me, it's all paid, everything's done. So we were looking at, from start to finish, 3 weeks? I believe that's right, that they were approved in October. But by the time they submitted the invoice, and it was a small project, it was 2 invoices, I think?
I don't know if it was 2. Well, yeah,
maybe it was just one.
I think it might have been just one.
So they are considered done. So it can be a quick process. Some of you, though, have more complicated projects, bigger projects. Expect to be talking with us over a number of weeks, if not months. And then on this last slide, I want to also emphasize something else. A lot of what I said might be changing. Expect a dynamic process. I was thinking an exciting adventure lies ahead, but no, dynamic means that things might change. And things do change. You know how it goes. Things change in your universe. Things change in ours. For example, we might have new federal or state guidance. Right now, there has not been a lot of ARPA spending, relatively speaking, nationwide. And think about it, everyone took time to get to this point. But there has been some spending, and now the audits are happening. And just last week at Auditor Conference, State Board of Accounts told us some of the issues they're starting to see. I think it's fair to say that what they are seeing in other counties has not happened in our county, so that's good, because we are trying to document everything. But what if the State Board of Accounts sees a persistent problem? They might issue a new directive that says, auditors, you need to start doing this. So then we will contact you. We have to do this. We have to do this. There could be, I don't anticipate major changes by U.S. Treasury anymore, but Treasury usually releases updated, frequently asked questions, and sometimes there's little tweaks in the processes and the procedures. So we might see something like that happen. There could be procedural changes in the county. We could change maybe something that is being done with the accounts payable process or whatever. And then comes, of course, the audit. Of course, I put this one up first. As much as we are trying to build a complete audit file, I hope no one is watching this who might be auditing us a year from now. But as much as we might try to build a complete audit file, the auditors might ask us for something. Expect us to contact you again. Even if it's a year from now, we might contact you and say something like, we need this report or that report, because the examiners are asking for it. It does happen. It happens all the time. And so do expect the unexpected. This is when you get your project paid for, we're not necessarily done. This is going to be a process. But hopefully we are going to make it as smooth and successful as possible. And then on the last slide is just some information that I know you probably can't really read. But our office has a ever-growing page on our website. What it is that, Kurt might need to help me with the terminology, but the auditor's office has a page on the county's website. And then we have sub-pages on the county auditor's website. We have a pretty robust ARPA page, and it is getting bigger and bigger and bigger. We're trying to be very up-to-date with it. So if you haven't seen that, try to go and look around. If you get to, yes, Kurt?
I can make the change on yours so they go to like
That would be great.
I'll do that in a few minutes.
Okay, and then that will take you to the main ARPA page, which just gives sort of general information, like all the projects listed, but it doesn't go into a lot of detail. If you really want the detail, go to the page that's called Tracking Porter County's ARPA Spending. We are breaking down every single project, and we are saying how much has been expended to date. We would like this to be as up-to-date as possible, just to give a running total of how much is spent. I primarily do the webpage, and I try to update it as often as possible. So that is probably the most detailed page. There's also the timeline. Whenever there's something really major that happens with ARPA, it's on the timeline. I have a feeling we're starting to see that timeline get a little bit, there's not going to be as much stuff happening, because I have dates in there about when the commissioners adopted this plan or the council approved that appropriation. We're not doing every single written agreement on that timeline, or ARPA was discussed at this meeting or that meeting. We're just doing the bigger things that happen. Also, you can see the quarterly reports that we submit to Treasury. This is a really interesting thing. If we were a larger county, we would be required to post our reports to Treasury on the same day that we submit to Treasury. And they must be 3 clicks away from the main page. Well, we're not required to post these reports. We're strongly encouraged to because of the size of our county, but we do. We're posting all of these reports on the auditor's webpage, and we're trying to do it more or less on the same day that we submit. Although if we submit kind of late in the day, it'll be the next day. I can't guarantee it's 3 clicks away. I think it's 3 clicks away, but we're not required to, but those quarterly reports are there. So you can look and see what it's going to look like. Just kind of envision, you're going to see your project. You're going to see your subaward. You're going to see your expenditures. I will say that there are some differences depending on what category you're in, and so the information might be presented slightly different. And also, if your total expenditures are less than $50,000, there's not a lot of information that's presented there. So some of what you see is for the larger projects. And also, we have auditor office contacts. And on the handout that I hope everybody got, we also list the auditor's office contacts because you're going to be having a relationship with the auditor's office. And now we're going to get to the question that I have been trying to figure out how to ask. I don't know if we should ask like a show of hands. How many of you are really wanting to proceed with your written agreement now, as soon as possible? Yeah, okay. So, if I were in your shoes, I don't blame you. You've gone through this process, let's get the written agreement, let's get it going. So, what we are going to do in the AR's office is that we are going to divide and conquer with our team. We're going to divide all the projects up, and you are going to hear from one of us. And that's why I put those email addresses in there, because to develop the written agreements, this is what we're going to need from you. There's going to be a list of questions that you will be talking to, either Vicki, Tony, or Tiffany. And some of the questions are going to be, how are we going to release your money? Are we going to do it reimbursement? Are we going to do it direct invoicing? We're going to talk to you about that. Do you have a concern about being listed as a subrecipient? Can you comply with the procurement procedures? There is a provision that the county can waive those procurement provisions, but there's got to be some specific steps taken. If we need to waive those procurement procedures, let us know. And then we will put that in the agreement. County officials have asked us to ask you and to expect compliance with the county's responsible bidder ordinance. This only applies to projects that are $250,000 or more. And so if there is a problem that you don't think you can comply with it, let us know, and then we will proceed. And we'll see what the county officials want to do about that. It's my understanding that the responsible bidder ordinance is not a difficult project to get through. Basically, your contractor will have to attest to certain things. Like, I think one of it is that they don't do dealings with Iran, that kind of stuff. So I've been told, we have not been involved with the county's responsible bidder ordinance. That's not what we do, but now we're going to be getting involved with that. So we're going to just start a dialogue with you, and we'll get the written agreement prepared, and then will say how you're going to spend the money. In one case, I'll tell you that I looked at the initial application and what was presented, and I thought I had a good description, so I sent the written agreement, and they said, no, let's not word it that way because we had to tweak the language a little bit. It's still the same project, don't get me wrong, but it's just the way that I worded it wasn't really a good way of wording it. And so you send it back to us. If it looks good, have your board president sign. The commissioners have one last meeting this year. And so if you have a desire to get on that commissioner agenda to get your agreement written, we're going to start this process as soon as possible. Like I said, most of these agreements are boilerplate. We just need to fine tune some of that detailed information. And you're going to ask me when the commissioners meeting is, and I don't know offhand.
I believe it's Tuesday, December 6th, but anything that goes on the agenda has to come to our office once we
Right. So we are looking at,
basically
okay. Yes. Now, I will say, the commissioners are, I'm sorry?
By the 29th of November.
By the, I think we're not here the 29th.
But that's when
Isn't it?
Vicky has to submit it.
To the office,
You'll
yes.
have to get it early.
The
Right.
25th is, the 24th and 25th are,
Okay, I'm off by a week. You're right, okay. Because, yes. Okay, so I think we can do it. I think we can try to get as many projects, written agreements as possible. Again, we don't need all your supporting documentation all up front, but I wanted to make sure that you know to get us the stuff before we release any of the money. So if you want to go forward, what we're going to do in our auditor's office, we're going to divide this up amongst the three of us. We have regular meetings. We maintain communication with us all. If we want to get this moving so that we get on the commissioner's agenda in December, we will try our very best to get as many agreements in place as possible. If anyone, I didn't really see if there were hands that didn't go up. If you could wait, then that's fine. But we will still contact you and see if you want to go forward right now. So that's one of the things I wanted to see. It sounds like most of you do want to go forward. And some of you are going to have some issues. I already know that. In terms of what we need to work out. But we'll do our best. We'll do our absolute best to get it on the commissioner's agenda. Now, somebody's probably going to ask, do we need to be at the commissioner's meeting? You do not need to be at the commissioner's meeting. I think we only had one township that was approved that showed up, but they haven't asked any questions. However, you are more than free to attend the commissioner's meeting. It is completely up to you. Yes?
So, a question pertaining to the agreement. Does the agreement period start with the final rule, or does it start when the agreement was presented to us for a reimbursement, for example?
Okay. Yeah,
Like, when does the clock start ticking?
Right.
Is it once the agreement is executed and you say, okay, now January 1st, 2023, you can start submitting and requesting for reimbursements, anything incurred after January 1st? Like, what's that hard date for us to be able to count something
Yeah.
as an
Yeah.
expense?
This is a good question because it just came up with our last report. Basically, the final rule says that you can go back to March 3rd of 2021. But I will confirm that that can be applied to the nonprofit reimbursement as well. Because we had an issue when we tried to submit our report, the period of the obligation period, we were going back in time, and the report wouldn't allow us to enter that earlier date because it was before the agreement was signed. So we decided to put the agreement start date as the appropriation date. This was an unusual one because there wasn't a contract associated with it because of the nature of the project. So if there is a contract, that was the period of performance beginning date. So we will look into that for you. So let's say that you already started paying for your project and it is before this time. We will confirm with you. My gut is that that's allowable as long as it is after that March 2021 date, March 3rd, 20, yes, yes, yes,
I want a clarification on two words you used.
okay,
You gave the date of July 1st, 2024,
yes.
that the funds have to be obligated or paid. I'm looking at a fairly lengthy process. I think that can be done by that date, completely done. But it's possible that everything can be obligated, but the project will not be done and paid for.
And that will be fine. It needs to be,
Obligated.
yes, it needs to be obligated by July 1st, 2024. It needs to be spent by December 31st, 2026. So is,
I'm old, I expect to be done long before.
Yes.
Yes.
the reason why I hesitated with that spent is because there is some guidance that said project completion by December 31st, 2026. But at a conference that was just held back last month, or a month before last, a consultant took exception to that the project must be completed. The funds must be spent. And there are some times where you can make your last payout to your contractor, even though they still have some things to do. Now, that's getting into the weeds, but that's what we got into. So, yes. Now, we can talk to you about how you're going to do it. I was wondering about your project, how you're going to proceed with it. Because are you actually going to have a contractor in place? So you will have a
I
contract.
think I'll have everything in place.
Okay.
And that's not going to be
So-
problematic for us. But I got some other things that have to happen first that could push the dates back.
Right.
So
Right.
I don't think we have a problem. You made it clear that we have to obligate.
Yes.
Not necessarily have it done or paid.
So
by the July
what
date.
we need is a contract with your contractor or contractors that's dated sometime before July 1st, 2024. And it would be very beneficial if in the contract they say project completion by the end of 2026.
Not a problem.
Yes. So as long as we have that contract, because then what we will do, when we report to Treasury, we will put those dates in. And that is the obligation start period. But that is a federal rule. Now, again, the federal rule is December 31st, but we moved it up for the external groups because of anything that might come back to the county. And I know other counties are doing that same thing, so we're not alone in that. Yes?
How does the obligated deadline affect if you are reimbursement construction? Like, and particularly if it's to reimburse for compensation for an employee that was hired during COVID? Because we're not going to pay ahead, even
Right.
though we may incur payroll between July and December of 2026. You see what I'm saying?
Yes. That could be a problem, because you're not going to have a contract with your employee.
Right.
Is there any way to pay the employee prior to that? In other words, this grant will only cover that period of time. Let me,
Well, I don't know if this would work on your end, but I know with other deadlines we have, I would think that we would have to make sure that we use that July date as a cutoff for
Yes.
reimbursement.
yes,
And then the next months
Then-
leading up to December, just quote unquote, don't count for whatever. You know what I
right,
mean?
that's what I would think too.
Especially if it's retro back to 2021 of March.
Right, right.
Because
Okay.
otherwise it'll get too, yeah. 'cause
Again?
We have employment contracts. It's not like, we're
Right.
billing shelter or whatever.
And-
you know,
And if you do have a contract with a non-employee, then it's not an employee, it's with a contractor.
Right,
It's
yeah.
a 1099 situation. Okay, we will look at that too. So the retroactive application for contracts and payroll. Under the course of nonprofit,
reimbursement.
I believe, I think we're good. I think we're good. But this is the type of discussion that we're going to have to have. If you ask us a question, we're not 100% sure, we're going to go back and we're going to review things. I think we're fine. I think we're fine. But let's get to that. Okay. Yes, I think, yes.
So I just want to be absolutely clear. What you're going to expect for reimbursement is submitting the accounts payable vouchers on an as-needed basis, as opposed to like a regular monthly or quarterly schedule.
We're going to be flexible with
Okay.
that.
It's
Yes.
just, with the grants that we have, we're used to submitting on a monthly basis or a
Right.
quarterly basis to the funding agencies, so.
Porter County is actually one of the very few counties that processes their payroll, or processes their accounts payable on a weekly basis. So we have the flexibility of giving you your reimbursement.
So we can submit expenses every week.
You could. No, and quite honestly, I mean, we have claims every single week. We have, so it would be preferable if you wanted to, lump them up a bit, but you don't have to.
Got it, okay.
Right, right. It's going up to you. I know one group is planning probably 3 different reimbursements. They're just going to hold everything and then just reimburse on that. Okay, yes.
I just want to make sure, earlier you touched base on the RVO, so for anybody that's doing construction work, it can be tied back to the responsible bidder ordinance for construction, not federal Davis Bacon, correct?
I think you're correct on that. I think it is the responsible bidders ordinance only. But there is a reference in there to the Francis Bacon, Davis Bacon, yes.
Just asking because of different work rules and
Okay.
the requirements and that's would pose an issue. Just for clarification, I'm assuming by the time we do contracts, we'll know.
Yes,
obviously.
yes. Okay, and yes.
So the goal would be to be established for a multi-million-dollar construction project to be able to meet the beneficiary definition. But in the worst case, if it's not, we have to go the subsequent route. Is it possible to earmark the ARPA funds for a specific piece of the project? Architect, a soft cost rather than the entire undertaking? For the documentation, for the contracts, for everything we have to provide for the file.
Yeah, I would say so. I would think so. And that is another dilemma. The groups that were assigned to the housing subcommittee were not required to show proof of economic harm. And so we may need to come back to you to get that information. When we went through this process, this, like I said, this is a potentially evolving process. That subcommittee specifically was tasked with housing, homelessness, and substance abuse issues and other behavioral health issues. There were some groups that were in the nonprofit category that could have been social service issues as well. And that was a hard decision to make. But if they expressed financial harm, they ended up being there in that committee, but the housing groups weren't required to. And in retrospect, maybe we should have asked for financial harm from those groups as well. So that's another one where we're going to have to work with you, because it sounds like you would prefer to be labeled a beneficiary. Okay.
I
Very
do
good.
want to make one quick comment. W-9s are going to be required of everybody.
Yes,
because
thank you.
We do have to put EINs, employer identification numbers, onto the information. Also, we do have the capability to do direct deposits. So if you have your contractors and/or either for reimbursement and/or for direct payment, we can process payment via ACH. we do have those forms, but W-9 is non-negotiable. Even if you are already a township or receive money from the county in the form of a distribution, we still need a W-9 with your EIN because we don't have a lot of your EINs. Distributions are completely different than actual direct payments.
One other thing, when we contact you in our question, this might apply more to the larger groups who are here. We will have to ask you if you've received in the past year 80% or more of your gross revenue from federal funds or 25 million or more in federal funds. Some of you are getting a lot of other federal funds. And so that might be a question that we'll have to ask of you. I believe that only applies if you're designated as a subrecipient, though. So that is something to keep in mind, because some of these federal grants are just getting more and more, and that might be an issue for some groups. Okay, anything else? Okay, so what we're going to do, we have your list, and that's why we asked for your emails, so that we have the most up-to-date email. And in some instances, we don't have emails because people have changed since that application process. So expect to get an email from one of us, and we'll start this process and we'll start that dialogue going. And if anyone can wait on getting, beyond December, and you want to push it off to next year, that'll be good for us. No, just for the timing. But if you do want to go forward, we will do everything we can to get us moving as expeditiously as possible. So feel free. And once you get that email from one of us, that person, it'll be one of the three of us, will probably be your go-to person. We're just trying to streamline everything so that we can get our other work done. We do have some townships here and the library here, and they're waiting on their property tax distribution, and that's a big project that's coming up. So we do have other things that we have to really work on in the auditor's office, and that's a big one. Yes?
This is a scary question.
Oh, no.
Will the outcome of the election impact anything you've said? Other than email addresses?
The auditor email address, we do have a generic one, auditor@porterco.org, but any individual has that.
She's avoiding the question.
I made a commitment to the taxpayers that I was going to work through the end of my term. So nothing that I said will change through December 31st. How's that? Well, December 30th. December 30th is a Friday. So.
The question was after that.
I honestly can't answer that.
Thank you.
Yeah. So if we can get as much done, now, that's just going to make life better for everybody, I think. So,
And I don't think anybody here we can't foresee the future, but we can look back and we can say, Vic Urbanek has made an incredible impact on this town.
I don't do good with that. Okay,
And
so.
hopefully that structure stays here and is the interest of in the interest of the county, that structure remains regardless of who takes the reins.
Right. And if you're ready to be submitting AP vouchers, once you get that written agreement approved, literally you can turn in that claim. As long as you have all the other supporting documentation, you can do it this year.
Sending us that form?
Yeah, I'm sorry. Yes, we will be sending you that form. And what we advise departments to do, save it on your desktop, quite frankly. I have like 5 of them on mine. You're going to use that same form with every claim that you submit to us. So.
Actually, you brought up another question. So you said original contracts. So I know that we have all of ours saved in the form of a PDF from the original signature. That's okay?
That's fine. No, what we want, the original agreement is the agreement.
Okay.
that we're going to work
Not the
with you.
ink that
We,
was
we want,
next on you.
yes, we
Okay,
want
I
to
got it.
see that a living, real person signed it, and it wasn't just a stamp, or, you know, when you email this, it doesn't look as good. But contracts, we're good if it's digital, that's fine. You have what, 2 construction projects, 3, 4?
Or, so we don't have to, I was gonna ask that, can it be divided or?
Yes.
Okay,
Yes.
So we can end up, since the original request, if it was a bit larger, can we do 3 of the 4, for instance, if needed, or should we
I think-
portion separately?
I think that's fine. As long as it was the project that was approved.
Yes.
If you're eliminating one of the projects, I honestly
Well,
don't
actually,
think
we
that
started,
that's.
yeah, the question is some of it is we always have to build a plane while flying it, so we're always doing these things before we get funding secured. So that's some of that retro when you can answer that.
Yes.
It's a reason, it's not.
Okay. Yeah, it should be.
The budget that was part of our original proposal had, line items and all that. So when we look at the signed agreement that just says the scope, as long, as we have this pile of money for the scope, do we need to be obligated to matching, what we had said for construction and supplies, or just as long as it's within those bulleted categories?
Well, we'll want the detail
Right.
on what you're spending it on.
Right.
But the budget account code that we are using for all nonprofits, in fact, everyone, it's just one line item. We're not breaking it down
Okay.
between salaries or, new vehicles or building supplies or capital or other capital outlays. We're not doing it because we're not technically paying for it. We're paying you or on your behalf. So it's under one line item. Yes.
Maybe we'll get clarification about that retroactive March 3rd, 2021 payments to, right? Because some of us are
Yes,
having to modify
yes.
our proposals because we're just getting a portion. So that will be a determinant in what we choose. to
Okay.
do there.
Okay, we will do that, definitely. I just have to say, I had the answer to that until we submitted our last report. And so it raised some questions in my mind in terms of maybe that March date only applies to certain parts. So we will double check that for you, definitely. Okay. Okay, anything else?
I guess while I
Yes.
just a quick sec, so if we already solicited bids from contractors and already reviewed them and already got board approval for the lowest request, is that going to be an issue or?
Can you document that you received multiple bids?
Yes, yeah, we have.
As
all of
long,
those.
then you complied.
Okay, great. I didn't know if there's like a
Because-
ticket on the
because-
front of them.
I hate to tell you, you are a subrecipient.
Yeah, I figured.
Yeah. So,
There's nothing about seeing, like, if it's already been done, it's okay.
yeah, but we'll need documentation. Did you take out a newspaper ad seeking bids, or did you go through whatever channels that you normally do? Whatever you do, we'll need documentation that you complied with those procurement provisions. And if you didn't, like I said, there is a way to grant a waiver, but we need to know. One of the provisions is if your project is so unique that there's really only one type of vendor in the area who could feasibly do the project. That doesn't apply with you, I don't think.
No, we got to usually get through.
Okay, I figured you would, yeah. So, good, and that's part of it. Before we pay anything, we need to see it that you sought bids. And again, how are you going to give us that information? And we might want, and who's going to get Porter Stark here? We might want an attestation that we saw it. And like I said, if you took out a newspaper ad, well, that would be proof. If there's board minutes, I should have put that. Board minutes are a great resource if you guys keep detailed board meeting minutes. Again, whatever you can get us. But as long as you sought those bids, you're good. Yeah, you complied. I can tell you that. So good. Good. We really don't want any, like, oh gosh, this isn't working, we really don't want that. We want every project to be nice and smooth.
If we
Yes.
submitted contracts as part of our proposal, do you need us to resubmit them?
No, and did you? Okay, so that's a good point. When you submitted your initial application, our office really didn't get involved with a lot of that. We were looking at other things, so we might have to go and retrieve it, or you could just submit it. Yeah, but yes, the signed contracts, that's what we need, yes. Okay, anything else? I'm sure there's going to be lots of questions. Like I said, expect a dynamic process. There'll be follow-up back and forth. We may contact you again saying, listen, we forgot to ask you this, or we need some other follow-up issue. We may have to have a sit-down meeting to hash out some of the peculiarities. There are some projects that are interesting, and how some of it is so straightforward and others are not. And so we're going to have a good dynamic process. So, okay. Yes, well, thank you. And thank you all for coming. And I did say for any group that's not here, we're going to sort of write up a summary. So expect that. We'll have that available as well.
Thank you.
Okay, and then we're going to get busy. Well, we're on this business, but